Welcome, folks. We're at the Paid to Play podcast featuring Hannah, Owen, and Anderson. We were talking about NIL deals and how it's affecting the college athletes around our nation.
So, to open up, some contract details that may be implemented because of the lack of structure within the contracts. The players must sign with the NCAA, and throughout the contract, there's talk about compensation, how long the contract is going to go, terminations, if there's any terminations that may need to be brought up.
Right. My question would be, how does if the coach got fired, how would that affect things? If a player's promised money, if the coach got released and left the program, does it affect his scholarship? Is it ran through his name, image, and likeness, or is it ran through the market of what the school has to offer in a sense? When you hear about NILs, you hear about players just having brands represent them. But would these players have that same name if they didn't go to a huge D1 university like University of Austin? Like, we can talk about the highest paid NIL player right now is
Arch Manning.
Arch Manning, yeah. And, would he have that much publicity and everything if he was actually brought on to, if he wasn't Eli and Peyton Manning's nephew? So it just really leaves a lot of questions of what actually is name, image, likeness, and are you building potential hype, and does it lead to potentially higher profit in the football field, not just the business market?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be careful with the politics in NIL deals. I mean, you have to look at also there's different contracts between the schools, NCAA, and outside organizations. So outside brands, like different sort of sport and lifestyle brands, they have their own rights to their own contracts. So they're able to terminate them as however they want, and there's probably going to be different structure with what they have to do on their social medias between those contracts.
I also think it's a good thing to add that the NIL also has a program called NIL Assist, which they just introduced, which is a platform and works with Teamworks to serve as a centralized source for student athletes to understand and make informed decisions. It also overall gives them educational resources and learns about the business in general, just because NIL is essentially making business deals.
Right. I mean, people are profiting major amounts of life-changing amounts of money. And especially when these kids are just 18, 19, just babies. It's just they're having to sign pretty much their life to a company. And now they have to represent a certain person or persona instead of being able just to focus on the benefits of being a college athlete.
And it's interesting how these NIL deals even started in the first place. Back to just a little bit of the history, some of the players were unhappy with how they were being treated, and they just expected, they deserved more than what they were getting. And they see all these contracts that MLB and the NBA offer. Some of these athletes are making $40 million a year, so they understand that their impact on their college performance and how, they can make a little bit of money for themselves. And not only the money factor, it is a business, like we said, of course, but, you're marketing yourself, your brand, your image, you're building all of that up. So, yeah, definitely a business.
Do you think a higher NIL deal equals to a higher draft round?
It could.
Because you're just essentially building hype around yourself and your persona on the field and off the field.
Sure.
So it's like so many people are pretty much betting on you to succeed because you're supposed to be this person. You're supposed to be that guy or that woman that steps up and takes over the entire scene. That's why brands want you to represent their company, because you're essentially the future of whatever sport, the NFL, MLB, NBA. You're essentially the face of it, the future face.
And that's why you need structure around the contracts. You need these contracts, or else it would just be completely, totally blown out of the water, and there would be so many issues. So it's great that the NCAA does have these procedures in place so everybody can understand what they're getting out of the contract, why they're getting out of the contract, and all of the details.
Right. And go ahead, Hannah. What were you about to
I
say?
mean, I can only imagine if there weren't contracts, these people who they wouldn't be allowed to hang out with, who they wouldn't be allowed to eat with, like those types of things. So, like, these contracts are set in place so that's fair for both parties. And I think that's the main thing why NCAA made this contract for these students, is so that it's fair all the way around.
Right. Does this essentially control what players have to do on an everyday basis? Are they represented by the people they're around or essentially hang out with? Does that affect their earnings now? Because now we're talking about players earning earnings for their likeness. So it's just pretty much of building a persona over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously there for athletics, but they learn a ton throughout the whole negotiating process because
Recruitment.
I don't know how many of these athletes have agents. I'm sure some do, some don't, but some of these guys have to be their own managers.
Right. And, essentially they're just banging off their ability to play the sport. And that's just crazy that it's bringing in this life-changing money that can essentially cause mayhem in these young kids' lives. There's plenty of studies out there about all these young NFL players crashing after they go 5 or 6 years in the NFL. And it's because there's not any structure to truly protect these people from having large amounts of money. Because at the end of the day, these large amounts of monies can completely change your life.
I was just about to say, it's all about the question of whether or not is it about the game or is it about the money. And unfortunately, in most of these cases, it's about the money and the deals that they are getting to provide for their family, too.
Right, and no one can blame them. If I could sign $500,000 right now to represent Walmart, well, it looks like I'm going to be a Walmart brand advocate for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and the amount of money that they make for such a young age. Some of these guys are getting multi-million-dollar deals at age 16, 17, 18. Cooper Flagg, who's a big basketball star at Duke right now, he's number 2, right behind Arch Manning. And, he's getting like $5 million a year.
Right, and, it leaves me with just a bunch more questions. Like, is there a cold season? Is there a hot season? Can players market themselves throughout the actual football season on like TV when they're doing interviews and stuff like that? Where does it go along with the network and things of that sense? How does it align with, if the network is sponsored by Gatorade and this player is sponsored by Body Armor? How does that work out? Things of that nature. Do they blur out the other image because they're trying to only bring publicity to one brand? It's just so many questions.
There is so many questions. And, I mean, it goes back to whether or not, did this individual pick this college for the money or for their own morals and own education? It just goes back to what's the reason they picked this and why.
Yeah, it kind of sort of feels like NFL free agency with right now we're in the middle of NFL's free agency, but it feels like these high school athletes and college athletes are also free agents, looking for another team to pick them up. So, it just keeps trickling down younger and younger.
And this relates more to having high school kids go to private schools because they're trying to get recruited by the highest talent to be able to receive the most amount of their money in their NIL deal. So it just creates a rhythm or a complete butterfly effect for all programs at all levels.
I also think another important question to consider is, I know a lot in especially college football, seniors will stay another year just so that they can get more money and more NIL deals, which means they skip out on the awesome opportunity to be in the NFL draft or other sports drafts and things like that.
Well, I mean, if you're already making money as equal amount to an actual NFL player, why would you put your body on the line and do that, And we just ended our first podcast with Paid to Play podcast, talking about name, image, likeness, and what it is with Hannah, Owen, and Anderson. We'll take a brief minute and come right back to you with the second part or segment, and we're going to go ahead and talk about the good things about NIL.
You are listening to the Pay to Play podcast with Hannah, Anderson, and Owen. We'll be right back.
So we talked about what an NIL deal is, and now we're going to go over some of the positives of what NIL might bring to the table for college athletes and building an image. So Hannah, what do you think building an image for an athlete looks like?
Well, I honestly think it can depend on each athlete and their sports, their morals, and what they look for. Obviously, each brand and organization that is offering a deal to these students have different morals and different things that they're offering to these students. So I think representing themselves well and academically online shows a really strong way of showing that you have good image and good likeness, especially when these type of people have younger viewers watching them. Maybe not so as more as adults, but they definitely have a younger following, which I think adds to the NIL contract.
Now, would you say these athletes kind of have some type of sense of responsibility to provide a good image for these young kids and everything like that?
Yes. When I talked about the WNBA opt-out, they were trying to change things for the future, and I just think that's how it's always going to be, just like how we create traditions to pass down onto families and everything like that. You are modeling the future of sports.
What exactly was the WNBA opt-out?
So the WNBA, they decided to opt out of their collective bargaining agreement, and now they are in works of creating a new agreement to better the WNBA, so like higher pay, childcare assistance, things like that.
And, you know, when you talk about the difference in pay between NBA and WNBA, it's enormous.
It's insane. It's getting better, but it is insane.
And so it's like when you can see these young athletes, especially women, that can just go out and receive more money based off their professional abilities and being able to have name, image, likeness, be able to represent themselves. And as a whole, it just allows them to be able to have more freedom in the sense of financial freedom and be able to earn more money and be able to provide for more people maybe in their lives, like their family or sense of that. So it's NIL is genuinely life-changing, and it can create new opportunities for each and every individual / athlete that allows themselves to be embraced and market themselves highly. So it just allows endless opportunities, I believe. I think it's a crazy standard that we're giving millions and millions and millions to young kids without payment plans, without protecting them in that sense. But at the end of the day, all we're doing is giving these kids what they're worth, especially in a couple of years they're going to earn that much. So at the end of the day, they're just getting the check before they have their career end. I know in the NFL, it's the minimum is 3 years. You know, that's a good career in the NFL. That's the average. You know, that's what it is. So these players, you know, they're not every player isn't signing 40, 50, 60 million dollars. So being able to get any penny for them is worth it because they're literally putting their bodies on the line to genuinely possibly have future generational problems like CTE, injuries, and stuff that never change them. So at the end of the day, NIL is providing opportunities for these kids.
I agree. On the money aspect, of course, you know, the NIL deals are huge for the athletes, but another positive is networking. Like you, as the athlete, get to go down whatever path you want to go. You know, you get to talk to your agents and network with other college athletes, you know, other pro teams. I'm sure, you know, all these guys that have NILs, I'm sure, you know, their agents are talking with pro teams and, you know, getting as many deals, brand deals as they can for these athletes to just continue to keep stacking up their network.
Right. I mean, Owen's right. I mean, 100%, you know, if these players want to someday go down that actress or actor role, they can certainly be in commercials, do voice reads in that sense using their name, image, and likeness, and that gives them more opportunity. I mean, the networking at the end of the day, you see many star athletes like, for example, an easy example, John Cena. You know, John Cena went from being the good guy of the WWE. Now he's straightly he went to movies and things of that sense and kind of put the WWE in a back burner. And now he's completely back at the WWE after rebuilding his entire brand. And now he's turned heel to completely have to turn an entire new brand. So it's just the name, image, likeness doesn't end after college. You know, you can completely you see it all the time back in the day. I see it, you know, with past athletes that open car dealerships. You know, they use their name, image, and likeness before that was even a thing. You know, they use their name that, you know, you love me on the football field, well, come buy a car from me. So that just created more, I think, was really the stepping stones of NIL, in my opinion.
And some of these athletes that have these NIL deals, you know, some of them aren't actually the best top quality athletes on the field. You know, it's obviously just their personality and the type of content that they make, which is interesting because even if they don't succeed at their sport and make it to the next level, they still get to have a platform on social media and they can do whatever they want with that platform. If their audience likes watching them cook, you know, they're going to watch them cook. It's, you know, you're selling that personality. So you really are building that image for yourself.
And maybe it's because NIL is so new. I think that maybe a way that players can start using their name, image, and likeness better in quotation marks is maybe start volunteering and putting that out onto the open. Maybe starting positive trends where the younger kids can start sharing that in their schools and following more trends and things like that. Maybe not just using their platform to promote their products, but promote good things and to provide a better world in general.
And I think that's what can be scary is that these kids can get money hungry and just promote whatever company's products that, you know, comes to their face and they'll promote it. But doing more stuff like volunteering and social work of any sense can be a lot more beneficial than just selling products at a mass.
Especially when you're influencing these young kids who you want to follow you and you want to like you and things of that sense. So at the end of the day, the better brand you're pushing possibly opens the door for how many more NILs you can get. Because I would say it's probably a lot harder to be the bad guy and to get everyone to sign on than it is to be the good guy and to have everybody be able to hop on your bandwagon in a sense.
It's just as easy to promote a healthy product than it is to promote Pepsi or Doritos or things like that. So there is a choice that is allowed to be made with these promotions and these advertisements and commercials that these players are doing.
I mean, it's just endless. It's just endless opportunity, and NIL has truly opened the door for these players. NIL truly is a good thing when these players have guidance and leadership to be able to protect them.
So we talked about some positives of NIL contracts, and now we're about to talk about some of the negatives of NIL contracts. We'll be right back.
You are listening to the Paid to Play podcast featuring Anderson, Owen, and Hannah. Thank you for listening.
This is Paid to Play podcast with Hannah, Anderson, and Owen. We just got done talking about what the NIL is, the good things about it, and now we are going to talk about the bad things. So, Anderson, what's one of the negatives of NIL right now?
Well, I mean, honestly, we're going to talk about the story of FSU a couple months ago, or really a few months ago, and how the basketball coach, his name was...
Leonard Hamilton.
Leonard Hamilton, I apologize. Leonard Hamilton promised 6 of his players NIL money up to $250,000, and none of them received it. And they got to the point where they were going to boycott. They boycotted all of practice before the season, and then they almost boycotted and sat out after the coach promised even more money against their arch rivals Duke. And it would have just pushed a huge message of just how bad and how this can potentially put a bad mark on these kids' resumes without them even knowing. You know, are you going to look at this kid exactly what you said earlier, Hannah? Is this kid playing for the money, or does he really want to be at FSU? And now it leads to more questions as, will he transfer to any other school without getting paid? And now all these coaches and recruiters have to figure it all out. So it creates pretty much a bad image for these players, even though they're doing this for name, image, and likeness.
Not only just a bad image on the players, but also on the whole athletic department and the school in itself for being in this situation in general.
Yeah, and the problem here was not the money, but it wasn't in a written contract. It was over a text. The coach sent a text to the players, and that's what they were using as a contract, and that's not a contract. A contract is a written agreement from both sides, both parties, to agree on regulations of the contract. So that's what gets really spotty is the fact that you need those contracts, or else you'll have situations like this where anybody can say, oh, this so-and-so coach promised me X amount of money, and you don't get it, and there's no contract. So, in this situation, I'm siding with Hamilton as much as I want to side with the players. It wasn't in writing, so how can you back that?
Right. I mean, that's what goes into having an agent, especially for these young players. It seems ridiculous. Like, why would an 18-year-old that's not going professional need an agent? But now they need someone to protect them on the law side and to actually hold themselves with contracts, to be able to sign contracts and potentially get all their earnings. But now that goes at a cost. Now these players have to pay for an agent, and they get a percentage of their contract. So it's really a risk, lose, reward. You're taking the risk to change your life and earn as much money as possible, but are you going to be protected? Are you going to lose your rights as your own person in a sense? Or are you going to have to completely live up to this name, image, and likeness that this brand is holding?
Yeah, I mean, in the contracts, it's going to detail what exactly the player has to do. So they really don't have control over what they do. They can't genuinely do what they want. Sometimes they're going to have to do what the contract says, whatever the company wants them to do, promote X product. They're going to have to promote it, or they're going to be terminated of their contract. So, yeah, it can get sticky.
And this is why we read before we sign things, because things that are missed, like things like that, it could end in loss. And that's not what we want as a student athlete.
I mean, right. I mean, y'all two hit the nail right on the head. I mean, especially with having to side with, just in the sense of how business is done. We have to side with Hamilton. At the end of the day, yes, he made a unmoral or unethical, that's the right word, unethical mistake maybe, or maybe an accident, or maybe he didn't get the funding that he thought he was going to by donors and stuff of that sense. But it's just leads of who's protecting these athletes. I would be dumbfounded if potentially in the future, if one of my kids, went to a college and he had to choose between two colleges, I would tell him to take the money, because that's going to completely change his life. So, and if he's smart about it, it can completely be the jumpstart to every single person's wishes. As a college student, I personally couldn't imagine having $100,000 at my disposal, let alone millions. That's crazy. Like, that number is, in the grand scheme of things, yes, that number's not life-changing. But to a kid that's never had money or anything, like, that money can genuinely do anything. It can provide for you for 6, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, living by yourself, to when if something all fails and crashes, if basketball or baseball or football doesn't work out, it leaves you to not be able to just burn and have nothing at the end of it. You actually get something. And it also, we didn't even hit on points of, there's 5 different levels of going up into the MLB. There's huge amounts of talents out there in the world. How are these players going to ultimately earn money to be able to financially sustain themselves during those hard times? And that's why it's so important for these players to protect themselves and to do this money right, not go buy a Lamborghini and then get pulled over. When I read stories like that, it's just, wow, all you're doing is creating a bad name, image, and likeness for yourself.
On the money topic, another unfortunate negative that comes with NIL is the incentive to compete, or the incentive for money, which is obviously a sad con. There's student athletes who really just want the money, and that's what they're going to go for. So the incentive to be the best player or to be on the best team is just gone. They just want the deals, unfortunately.
And the pressure. Imagine the amount of pressure to actually get these contracts. Like, we're sitting here talking about NILs, but it's only a small percent. It's only a fraction. 1% of these athletes are actually getting these deals. So, the people that are in that 2%, like right on that line, that want these deals, and they're just being turned down. That's got to be rough on their mental health. People already deal with mental health in sports alone, but adding money and contracts and NIL deals to compete on top of that is, it can be bad.
Right. Now imagine being at, one of the best schools in the entire nation, competing for a national championship or a national title, and a place tells you you're not good enough to be represented by us. It's just crazy. It just leads to more people just needing protection, needing ways to help themselves, and just ultimately protecting these young people of future mistakes.
I mean, in the end, there is a right and a wrong way to go about signing an NIL contract. And unfortunately, you'll be able to tell who is doing it the right way and who is doing it the wrong way. And that says a lot about the student athlete. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I think it's great, obviously. You have a chance for these athletes to make an image for themselves and, just have an impact on not only sports in general, whatever sport they're playing, but the kids. And, that's who creates the audience. That's who generates the money for them to even be able to earn that money in the first place. So, that's obviously great, but the contracts part is, where things can genuinely get risky. And that's why these players have to hire the agents. They have to, talk to their parents even because they're so young. Their parents are probably their agents at times. So, yeah, it can be good, it can be bad, but overall, I think it's great for the sport, for all sports, and just growing college sports in general.
Completely agree. This is great. Great for business, great for, futures of these kids' lives and things of that sense. A little backup on Hannah, I wish they had ways to protect themselves and to actually separate just themselves from the actual money and the sport. But at the end of the day, these kids are banking on their careers, and this is giving them that opportunity to genuinely bank on it. And I enjoy it. It gives these kids something to play for while they're in college other than just college opportunities, because as we've seen in recent years, your college life can make or break your professional world, and these kids' opportunities are being taken away by committing themselves to these football programs and these baseball programs or basketball programs. This is their life now. This is who they are. This is what they do for work, and this is their job. They have to show up and do a job, and so I think it's great for the sport.
Thanks for listening, guys. This is Paid to Play podcast with Hannah, Anderson, and Owen.